Hi, I'm Katie Crane, and this is the Pilates Lounge. Hi everyone, my name's Katie Crane. I'm the Pilates professional. Welcome to another episode of the Pilates Lounge podcast. Now, we must be at episode 27 by now. So we are midway through the season and we've already started to have some really wonderful guests on the podcast. And we've been getting some great feedback from you guys. So I've decided to continue to invite guests. And today I'm very excited to have Lisa Jackson joining me so that we can have a discussion about a topic that is often queried both on my Instagram and within the podcast. We're going to be speaking specifically about bone health. So before we get underway, let me introduce Lisa Jackson to you, just in case you have been living under a rock and have not heard about Lisa's work. Lisa Jackson is a principal trainer under the Pilates Association of Australasia and a continuing education teacher and mentor. She is also the faculty member for the internationally recognised Buff BonesBadge Registered Outline Osteoporosis Program for Australia and has been the Brisbane Pilates teacher of, I can't believe that you have taught these guys, I'm seeing them in November, of Cirque Du Soleil for Totem in 2015, Kooza in 2016, and Kurios in 2020. Goodness me, that must be such an experience. Now, Lisa began her Pilates journey back in 2001 when she was living in Los Angeles. In 2003, Lisa trained at the Physicalmind Institute in LA and New York, and then returned to Australia in 2006 so that she could continue learning and exploring her passion for Pilates with the work of Sally Anderson, who was at the time, is the founder and director of PilatesITC, Pilates International in Australia. Lisa has completed her diploma and advanced diploma through Pilates ITC and acted as the Queensland faculty teacher for Pilates ITC until 2019, when she stepped aside to follow her passion for building a deeper understanding of the biomechanics through the hip and pelvis as a key driver in providing quality movement. And I love that you have done this, Lisa, with our topic of bone health today. I know that I don't want to go down any rabbit holes. Let's stick to bone health and osteoporosis and osteopenia in general. But I have no doubt that your understanding or your continued work with Alison Grimaldi, who is a leading hip physiotherapist and hip academy director, plays a huge role in you being able to present the work that you are to educate us as Pilates instructors, movement lovers, and inspired movers so that we can continue to support our community. Because we were talking before we started recording, and we will get to it in a little bit, but Lisa was saying how there are so many misconceptions around who osteoporosis may affect and who should even understand more about bone health. And it's probably not what you're thinking as a listener. But Lisa, I'm going to hand the floor over to you. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you being here. I would love to hear a little bit about your journey. I mean, we know that you found Pilates in the States. So did I, actually. But, tell us a little bit more personal about your journey and where you're located now.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, thanks, Katie, for having me. It's a real honour and a pleasure to come and talk about things that I'm super passionate about. Pilates obviously is one of those things. As Katie, you probably know from having many years in the industry. So I've now over 20 years of teaching movement and Pilates. My passion has grown so much in terms of trying to provide an environment for people, which I believe really is Pilates, which is about you, your body, and how you choose to move and how many ways you can move. And that even kind of goes back to the topic of osteoporosis, that you don't need to be fearful of movement if you have osteopenia or osteoporosis. You just need it to be guided in the right direction. And I think, so if we go back to myself and my history, 20 years of learning so many different kinds of movement. And as you probably know, Katie, all the crazes that we've been through, the squeeze your butt, the everything about the pelvic floor, that all these different research pieces that come out and those phases that we go. I think it's, as we were talking earlier, it's that learning process. So for me, having my experience as a Pilates teacher for so many years has just enabled me to outskill so much, learn so much from so many different people. And I think that's one of the most important key things in Pilates is this sense of community and the people that you actually meet. So in my experience, I feel so blessed to have worked with and been mentored by some incredible people in the industry. And Rebecca Rothstein was one of those, a very dear friend of mine. And I met her years ago back in America and loved her philosophy and her outlook and the way she taught and what she believed in. And that was when I first started the Buff Bones training. And she then came to Australia and did some training over here. We trained together over here. And then she handed the baton over to me to continue training for Buff Bones for her in Australia. So we share this common link. We both love talking about bone health and joint health. And so my experience of working with Alison Grimaldi as well has only enhanced, our ability to provide really good education through the Buff Bones system. So, yeah, I think in terms of where I come from and what I've learned, it's just so varied. And if I can share anything with anybody, no matter what your passion is in terms of teaching Pilates and movement, that you have to be patient and time is, we're always learning, always be open to learning experiences and always be open to hearing other people's perspectives. And then you can take on board what means something to you or you can resonate with. And if not, then you don't need that right now. And I do think that's the beauty of Pilates, that where we are right now, there's just so many talented people in the industry that we can certainly learn and continue to keep learning. So, yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell where I got to I am now. Hopefully I've explained that.
Yeah, sure. That's great. And so what piqued your interest in osteo or in bone health?
So it kind of really started from me way back, actually. I don't know, I kind of just resonated more towards the biomechanical kinesthetic side of movement, I guess, which obviously includes the skeleton and how bones like to move. So I've always had a bit of an interest more so in that side of things. And in my family, we actually have quite a strong history of osteoarthritis in the hips. So in terms of just shapes of everybody, our family commonly has what's referred to as a very deep hip socket. And that's quite a genetic factor that comes through in a lot of us in the family. So not only my mum, but aunties and things have all had to go through. My mum's had a double hip replacement and my grandmother hip replacement and had osteoporosis. So I kind of feel like because I worked a lot with my mum, I trained my mum for years and stuff in the studio, I just kind of started, wanting to know more, wanting to know how to help her more, wanting to kind of understand that whole joint bone connection. So I think that's really what sparked me. And then I always kind of believe that the universe just brings to you what you need, because I'd kind of reached out to Alison Grimaldi at some point and I'd been working with Rebecca, and it just kind of all kept growing and coming together. And of course, my interest kept growing and me wanting to learn more kept growing. And then Rebecca and I wanting to develop more work for the program, has been also really, really a big driver in, just wanting to keep moving forward in this field.
Yeah, okay. And can you, for our listeners who probably heard the term osteoporosis and may or may not have heard the term osteopenia. I remember when I first started instructing, I definitely was familiar with the term osteoporosis, but it took me a while to really get a handle on, the similarities and the differences. Could you explain it to us?
Absolutely. And that's such a great question, Katie, because I think there is a little bit of misconception out there between osteoporosis and what's referred to as osteopenia, or it can sometimes be called low bone density. So someone might be just told that they have low bone density. It's the same thing as osteopenia. So interestingly, first of all, I'll describe what the medical field term as osteoporosis. So they basically refer to it as a common skeletal disorder characterized by compromised bone strength, predisposing a person to an increased risk of fracture. So that's the actual medical term that they like to use. And I think what's really important is that, so basically it means that the makeup of your bone becomes the structure within the bone itself is actually altered to a point that it no longer holds that same density. So we think about our bones as nice and stiff and strong. And in actual fact, our bones are stiff and strong, but they also have a more pliable side as well. So there are a mix of minerals, so hard compound components, and soft collagen. And that's what kind of gives bone its natural ability to absorb load, to withstand load. So if bone was only mineral and fully dense, it would probably crack like glass the minute that you hit it against a wall or ran into something. So we have to remember that good quality bone requires a really good mix of the hard mineral side and a good mix of the soft collagen side. And so when we think about osteoporosis, we're thinking about a change in its architecture. So basically inside your bones, you've got there's two types of bone, one called trabecular and one called cortical. Cortical bone is the outer surface of your bone, what we see in skeleton, what we think of as that hard component. But at the end of your bones, your hip joint is a really good example of this. You have what's called trabecular bone, and it's like honeycomb-shaped bone. So it has all these lovely funnels that make it nice and rich and dense and able to absorb and withstand and have a little bit of sense of yield and give to it so that we don't just break. And so what happens when you get osteoporosis is this structure changes and the bone tends to become more brittle and thin, and it has more tendency to break. So this is the biggest problem that we see with osteoporosis. It's not actually the condition of osteoporosis. It's the fact that if a person were to fall, they're more likely to break or fracture a bone from that. So in terms of the differences between osteoporosis and osteopenia, osteoporosis is when that architecture has changed so much from the average person that they are at a higher risk of it breaking. Now, osteopenia, we still have change in the architecture. And interestingly, even though osteopenia may never eventuate into osteoporosis, we need to be aware that you can still fracture with osteopenia. And in actual fact, we see more fractures in osteopenia than we do in osteoporosis. And there could be varying reasons for this. So basically, Healthy Bones Australia, their statistics say that 1.2 million people are estimated to have osteoporosis, but a further 6.3 million are living with low bone density. So there's quite a big difference between those actually diagnosed with osteoporosis to people who are living with low bone density or osteopenia. Now, that major difference could be one of the factors as to why we see more fractures in osteopenia. It just could be a mathematical thing. So basically, you have a lot more people with living with osteopenia than you do with actual osteoporosis. So there's more chance that you're going to see more fracture. The other side to that too, though, is there can be a misconception that if you only have low bone density, that you're not going to fracture, that it's the person with osteoporosis that's going to fracture. So perhaps that person with osteoporosis may be more careful or may be doing more things for their osteoporosis because they've had an actual diagnosis. Whereas low bone density, we might see people who are less aware, less focused. And so, they trip, they have a fall, they break their wrist. And, so we're seeing more of that. So there's a few components. We're not really 100% sure why, but we do know that the statistics are higher. We have more people fracturing in the osteopenic range.
That's a lot of people. So that's 6 million people in Australia.
That's in Australia. And they also point out on their website, we see 183,000 broken bones a year due to low bone density. Now, and this is where our focus needs to be. This is where research is heading. So a lot of it is based around. So if we think about it and we consider breaks, so bone breaks, one of the most common is a hip fracture. Younger people tend to get more what we call Colles fractures, wrist fractures. And I even see a lot, which gives me a little red flag, is when midlife woman says they fractured their toe. So there's all these little kind of precursor things where people might actually be like, oh no, I just tripped and fractured. And that definitely could be an actual, yes, you did just trip and fracture. But I think it's also, if you're at an age within an age group, which is postmenopausal women, and you have a fracture, you do definitely need to be getting a bone density check done. So I think in terms of fractures, we're seeing a lot of costs. So there's a couple of areas here that are really important. A big cost to the government is having to deal with these fractures. So not only are we dealing with them in hospitals, but we need to think about what's happening after. So they're coming out, they're needing a lot more care, they're having to go through physiotherapy, there's a change in their life. So it's not just that initial hospital visit. So it's all the post-op care that goes alongside. Are they able to live independently after they've had a fall and fracture? So that can depend on their age, their capabilities. And so all of these elements contribute to quite a big burden on the Australian health system. And so when it comes to treating osteoporosis, one of the key components is the reduction of falls and fractures. So I think it's really important that we understand that if we can help people get better balance, stronger muscles, really help that chance of falling, if we can reduce that, then we're really, really helping, do a good thing by that person, but also, for us overall.
Yeah, totally. So there's so many ways that we could go. So what determines that bone density in somebody? Like, is it genetic? Is it lifestyle? Is it age? Like, what are we considering?
All of the above. Yeah, all of the above. So one thing I want to just talk briefly about is, and Katie, you and I were talking about it, when I was laughing about when I first started teaching the Buff Bones course, and people would show up and they'd be like, hey, this is really hard. I thought we were doing a seniors class. And I said straight away, this is not for seniors. We think of osteoporosis as an old person's disease, but in actual fact, it's not. And we're seeing a lot more in younger people now. Why? Change in diet, change in lifestyle habits. We're a lot more sedentary, so we're not giving bones what they need, which is a lot of activity. So the more sedentary you are, the higher your chances are at having lower bone density. And I'm going to just explain that briefly, because this is a problem that I see happening in the future. So basically, the way your bones model themselves, So they need stress. So they need you to be placing demands on them to actually adapt to that. So for example, if you think about a tennis player and they use their right arm, and so they're playing tennis all the time, and it's always changing. So you're changing in a different way all the time. You're going to notice that right dominant arm, the forearm probably has a lot more bone density, a lot stronger muscle. I'm a rock climber. I see it in rock climbers as well. They have incredibly thick, strong forearms because they are pulling on their arms, using their muscles, and actually putting stress on the bones to actually take on that load and adapt. So bones require stress. They require us to jump around. They require us to change direction and to load up our muscles. So as we grow, that's a constant ongoing thing. And our bones are building and creating all their bone mass. So basically, by the time we reach our early 20s, we've probably reached the majority of our bone thickness or our bone mass that we're going to develop. And then really by about 30 to 35, that process pretty much stops. And so after that has stopped, you're basically just maintaining. So you want to maintain that nice bone density, that nice thickness, that nice strong bone that you've developed through your teens, predominantly is the most crucial years, and then into your early 20s. So if we think about it, if there's any components, risk factors, and we never fill our bank account, so think of it like a bank account. So we could be a dancer who got her period late, so never went through puberty until much later, very thin, fine body, okay, many things that can contribute to not actually, and this is actually what happened to Rebecca. So Rebecca from Buff Bones was diagnosed at a very young age, but she was a dancer. She's a tiny little thing. She already had small bones, and then she was very late going through puberty. She also, they discovered, had a low vitamin D level within her system. So that was what predisposed her to actually never reaching what would be termed as the normal peak bone mass. So if you already sit under what is the average, by the time you do get older, that's a lot you have to make up, and it's much more difficult to remodel bone when you get older. So the rule of thumb is when you're young, what you get in bone mass, you pretty much can retain pretty much throughout your life unless there's some major incident that occurs. If you don't reach peak bone mass, so you're always on the low side, so you might have also had a poor diet. You may have been a sedentary child. You may have smoked, drank a lot of alcohol. It may be a genetic thing in your family. So these are all precursors. And then you never reached a good amount of bone mass level. When you do get to those later ages, which is normal, as we age, we lose muscle tone and we lose bone mass. That's normal aging process. Women get to this earlier than men because we go through menopause. And menopause, the level, when we lose those estrogen levels, that is what predisposes us to a higher risk for osteoporosis. So as we reach menopause and our hormone levels are changing, and for many women, we're going to lose bone mass. That's normal because estrogen plays like a policeman, and he basically helps the cells balance out how they remodel. So we have cells that are breaking down old bone and cells that are rebuilding new bone. Now, if this doesn't occur at a nice even rate, and we get more breakdown than we get building, that's basically when we get osteoporosis or low bone density, osteopenia. So in estrogen being a policer of this, When estrogen levels are low, it kind of sends that into a little bit of confusion. And so we know that we're going to lose some bone mass through that time. So think about it. If we haven't gained, if we've been somebody that's always been a little bit on the low side due to lifestyle or any of those factors that I pointed out, then we're going to have to work pretty hard to try and maintain even what we have or gain more to see us through. And when we're older, we must keep working at it. So when we're young, the body says, yeah, this is good, I can retain this. But as we age and we try to do it, the minute we stop, it forgets and says, yeah, no, I'm going to forget about that now. So basically, you have to constantly keep exercising, maintain good nutrition and diet to maintain those bones, because if you stop, it's going to go backwards again. So I think that's a really important factor to note as well, that it's not about, oh, well, I'll do this exercise for 6 months, I'll build my bone density, and then I don't have to worry anymore. That's not the case. And I think in general now, when we talk about aging, we know that we need to stay active to be able to maintain muscle tone and bone strength. Like, it's not just an intermittent thing. It's something that we have to build into our lifestyle. So coming back to my point of who is this important to? It's important to everybody, but don't think about leaving it too late. So I think particularly women, once they're in their 30s, ensure that you are giving them options to, change up their exercise, get them on their feet, especially if you know things like they have an office job, they don't have many other opportunities for exercise, and they might love their Pilates class, but you want to think about incorporating some more upright movement, some impact into your classes so that you actually are, providing a full body workout that includes some bone health techniques as well. And we can go over those if you want to soon also. Now, I just want to come back to, how they screen. So just so people understand, because often people may come in with a reading. So how they actually screen for osteoporosis is through what's called a DEXA scan. So some people may have heard of this. And it's basically an X-ray machine that checks your bone mineral density. So it looks at how thick and strong your bones are. And so they then take a reading and they compare your reading from an average 20-something-year-old, so early 20s. So they're not comparing you to someone your own age. It's called a T-score, and they will compare you to what would be the common average at peak bone point. So when you've reached peak bone mass, how do you sit from that? So that's basically how they're measuring your bone density. So the further away you are from that, the more into the osteoporotic zone you are. So basically, if you get shown a scan and someone says, I'm between -1 from the average to -2.5, that's termed osteopenia. Once you go from -2.5, so backwards from the average, to 4, you are in the osteoporotic range. And you can be diagnosed with osteoporosis only in the hips or only in the spine. So where they test are generally spine, hips, and they'll sometimes test radius. But the hips and the spine are the most common places of testing. And so it's not uncommon to have different readings in both. You could have osteoporosis in both, but you may have it or you may be osteoporotic in one, the hip or the spine, and only low bone density in the other, osteopenic in the other. Now, if you get and you see a scan like that, my thing is just treat them the same. And many people also ask me, Katie, if someone has low bone density compared to being classed as osteoporotic, do I need to be as careful? Do I need to, worry about them so much? Now, I don't think it's a term of worry about them. I think it's a thing of, can we take on the responsibility of ensuring that this person, we do the best possible things we can to help this person so that they don't lose more bone density, or that we can actually improve them and bring them even out of the osteopenic range. So I never look at it like I don't have to worry. I can still do all the same things with them. We can add loaded flexion, and I'll go over some of the, things we want to avoid a little bit. But we want to think about what's going to help them. Okay, so that's always my philosophy. When people say, yeah, but I haven't had a fracture and I've been told I can't flex my spine. Well, some of the key areas that we want to be very, very careful of with any type of low bone mass is loaded flexion, particularly at end range. So, we're thinking here things like rollovers, short spine type exercises. And some people that have had fractures, we really are going to avoid any type of load inflection and rotation, and load under flexion and lateral flexion. So really, it's anything that's taking you forward and twisting in any way. And that's basically because that area in that thoracic from around your T6 down to your T12 is a really highly compromised area. And so what can happen is there's two things. You can get a compression fracture, which basically means your vertebra just kind of collapses on top of itself. So if you think about like a cushion, and the foam in the cushion kind of wears away, and then the cushion, you've been sitting on a cushion for ages, and then it gets that squash shape. So that kind of feels that would be like what you would get in a compression fracture. And what that basically means too is that when you're getting those compression fractures, you're getting less space, you're getting more compression down through the discs. So you can kind of start to get, what I see in people generally is that kind of real tightness through the spinal muscles. And then you can also get wedging. So basically that means if we think about our spine, often when we think about our spine, we think about backs. But we need to remember that our vertebra, sitting like dominoes, one on top of the other, or building blocks, we have the front side of that as well. And so that's sitting like, if we're looking through our tummy, we're actually seeing the front portion of the vertebra. Now, what generally happens when you get a wedge fracture is the actual vertebra collapses forward, and then the fracture breaks off a part of the front of that vertebra itself. And then obviously, when we think sometimes about osteoporosis, we think about the kyphosis. So that's where you see that kind of the spine then starts to move its way forward into more of a kyphotic shape. But don't be confused by you think osteoporosis is going to have kyphosis, because I have seen many osteoporosis where it has more of a compressed look, where it kind of looks like the spine is quite stiff and tight rather than kyphotic. So they're kind of two little things just to think about in terms of, those spinal fractures. So I'm probably going off in a tangent, but while we're talking about fractures, then when we think about the hip, the place that is most susceptible is the neck of the femur. So, and the hip fractures are probably the most dangerous of all fractures. And there's a reason for that, because often with hip fracture comes some other comorbidities. So hip fracture in an elderly person, we know can lead to pneumonia in hospital. It leads to a big change in their living. So they may no longer be independent because they can't walk properly. So we need to, really understand, what the hip fracture can actually due to a person's lifestyle. Okay. And we all know, even living with osteoarthritis, how that can be painful. Imagine trying to rehab from a hip fracture, especially if you're elderly. And often that is what ends up putting people in a home because they could no longer care for themselves. So the key is to address it before we get to those stages and we're at later life and we're not able to cope.
Do you think, going back, some of the lifestyle choices that people make that may contribute to poor or low bone density, I mean, it does affect more women than men, and that must be a hormonal thing, right? If we have, like, say, a 28-day cycle compared to a man has a 24-hour cycle, they're constantly producing hormones. I would assume that's got something to do with it. But do you think that the contraceptive pill and stuff would play a role in some of those choices? If you're on contraception for a long time, especially, I've got friends that, who have taken that, since they're 12, 13 years old.
There's actually no evidence to say a contraceptive pill has any effect on bone health. So that's a good thing to note. There are other medications, though, that we need to be aware of that do affect bone density and bone health. So we need to think about cancer medications. So chemotherapy and cancer meds have a strong prevalence over bone health. So we do know that if we're seeing more breast cancer in women. So then we're seeing more bone issues with women. We have to be very careful and try and really help build on that bone health if we know somebody's undergone chemo and cancer treatments. We also know that cortisone, so we know steroid type medications have an impact on the health of bone. So if you've been on a lot of those types of medications over the years, can impact bone. And here's an interesting point as well. Through those menopause years, which again, as I mentioned earlier, is predisposing us to bone loss because of the loss of estrogen hormone, we also see a change in tendon health in these women. So that's another, our collagen levels change. And so if you think about it, we're seeing women perhaps getting more of these type of injections, cortisone injections. And so then we know that these, if they're getting a lot, we try to encourage them not to, but we're getting, if they're getting a lot of these cortisone injections, that's going to have an impact on their bone health as well. So I think it's important that people recognize, when they are taking things like this, that they do know, all of the information about what they're doing and what they're taking. So I always try to help people make an educated choice. You can't tell them what to do. And I certainly know that sometimes steroids and cortisones and things is going to, help pain levels, but we need to understand long-term use of these things as well and what it can affect. We also know the difference. Yes, sorry, I just finished one of the other things we need to think about in terms of the differences with men and women. Not only is it hormonal, but we also need to recognize that women are smaller in general. We do have smaller bones in general. And we have to remember that we also just naturally have lesser bone mass, muscle mass. So they're another just to really think to be aware of that why we see more women being diagnosed earlier than men, because men naturally do have larger bones and they do have a different type of muscle to us. So, they have a lot more type 2 muscle fibers generally. So, they're just different in their makeup, which puts them at a phase. They still are going to go through what we all go through in normal aging, but it comes a little later than women. So there's a few varying reasons as to why there's more women and why we get diagnosed earlier.
Mm-hmm. And so you have mentioned, some, that we want to avoid loaded flexion with people who have osteoporosis. Could you go into that in a little bit more detail? So what are some specific Pilates exercises or exercises in general that we definitely want to be very careful of or avoid altogether? And, how could we maybe modify them or choose a different option for these people? And is there a time when we progress towards that stuff, or do we always stay away from it?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I love that, Katie, you said, can we make different choices for them? That's the way I like to put it. I never like to have somebody feel like I'm taking something away from them, but I like to let them feel like, yeah, but what we're giving you is going to benefit you so much more than, that thought of having something taken away from you. Now, there's a couple of things, because it's funny because in the literature, you might find they never really talk specifically about contraindication, which I know that, we hear a lot in the Pilates world. So if you do your Pilates training, you will always be told that the contraindication for osteoporosis is they don't do flexion. So I mentioned earlier that one of the key things particularly is loaded flexion. So I think any exercises that is loading people into flexion, you definitely want to stay very clearly away from. And I always like to think of it, Katie, like maybe that person's fine, maybe nothing's going to happen to them. But I'm always like, yeah, but I'm not risking that on my watch. Okay. If I can do something that's going to benefit them rather than, that just having that one unlucky day where I'm the one there and something happens to them because I gave them a loaded flexion exercise because they said they liked it. Yeah, I just don't want to be that person. So I'm an on the side of caution type of person. Because, often, to be honest, Katie, if you work one-on-one with somebody and you know that they've had no fractures, they have good muscle tone and they're generally strong and able, there's nothing wrong with a cat stretch and, taking some very gentle flexion through the body, because, yes, we do know that we need to do that in everyday life. But my thing is, if you're teaching a group particularly, so if you want to offer an osteoporotic or bone health class, then you do not want to put anyone at risk in that type of environment. If you don't know them, you don't really know their history, or maybe they're a forgetful client. Those clients that forget to tell you things. Oh, yeah, I did fracture my such and such, I just forgot about it. And then you're like, oh my God, and I've been doing all these things with you. So I tend to always go on avoid flexion on your watch. Or if you're working individually with a client that you know well and you know how to cue them through well flexed exercises that are going to benefit them, that's fine, that's safe. But always avoid. So when we're talking loaded flexion, like I said earlier, you're going to avoid things like your short spine, your long spine, your rollovers. You're going to avoid your towers particularly. You're going to avoid things on the chair, like side overs on the chair, anything where you're pushing down and loading into those ranges, pikes, all of those kind of things where you're going to be putting excess pressure onto the thoracic vertebra. Now, I want to point out too, while we're talking about that pelvic tilting, because your lumbar vertebra are already in a lordotic position. So they're already in a more extended position than the kyphotic position that comes naturally through the thoracic spine. So because of that, the chances that just the shape and design by nature is not as crucial as you flexing through their lumbar spine, through their thoracic spine. So we definitely do pelvic tilting. I have no problem with doing a small range pelvic curl up to the lower rib, where we're really focusing on those hip extensors, those legs, and those really good solid arms supporting them. It's really, we're thinking about things that can be compromised. And as I said earlier, it's that mid-thoracic down to the T12, which can be very compromised. So any area there. And I think in general for me, if I'm even thinking about it, again, this comes back to you knowing your client. So if you do know that your client, perhaps side bends, so when they do lateral flexion, they do struggle to stay in the coronal plane and they tend to be tight and rotate forward, I'm then probably not going to load up lateral flexion because I don't want to, for example, on the Wonder Chair, push down on my hand, or even on the Reformer, take a mermaid, and they're kind of really flexing into that twist. So I think using common sense a little bit there and just working with your client if you're in a studio environment is really important. And then if you're in a group environment, whether it's a group bone health reformer class or a group mat class for bone health, you're going to take out chest lifts, you're going to take out anything that's taking them into spinal flexion, just to be on the safe side. And then you're going to emphasize the areas that need targeting, which is spinal extension, hip movement, so hip strength, and arms, wrists, upper body, wrist strength. We want to really focus on those three key areas where I mentioned earlier are really prone to fracture. So spine, super important, hips, and the wrists. So we need to get some nice work that is specific to those areas.
And could you share with us a little bit about the Buff Bones program, or if we were working on somebody and wanted to improve their bone density? I always think of the beauty of Pilates is that we are constantly changing our relationship to gravity, to quite often allow somebody to move into ranges that they might not be able to, say, if they were standing. But with bone density, we want to get people bipedal standing, right?
Yes.
That's one
Absolutely.
of the bone strengthening concepts. Could you talk us a little bit through that and how we might integrate that into our Pilates session?
Yes. And this is, I think, I'm going to now point out the three key areas for bone health and exercise. We need strength training, okay? And I'm going to kind of go over that in a minute because that brings us to the most recent research that's out there and probably a little bit of the hype that's out there as well. So strength training is one part. We need impact training, which is another really important aspect. So both strength and impact training, Katie, they are for bone mineral density. They are definitely directed at increasing bone mineral density. So they have a direct correlation with bone health. Now, there's a third factor that comes in, and that is balance, core work, and coordination work. And those three things, as we know, we need good core and coordination for good balance. So they are super, super important for this helping reduce the risk of fractures and falls. So I think as Pilates professionals, we need to be really clear about where we sit in this space. And this is what I really am very passionate about sharing, because we hold a very important place in bone health as Pilates instructors, as long as we're really clear about what we're trying to achieve with it. So if I come back to strength training basically means that you are working at an intensity. So we're looking at high intensity strength training. And this is probably where, I'm not sure if you've heard, or any of the listeners out there, where you see it everywhere now. Menopause women, when we age, we need strength training. We need to be in the gym. We need to be doing strength training. And so then what's happening is we're seeing some of these women coming into Pilates and saying, I'm not lifting weights. I need to be lifting weights. Or this weight isn't strong enough. I need more weight. And I definitely know, Katie, that we can up weight and we can definitely build strength in the Pilates space. But I think we need to recognize that the strength under a bar, so when we're thinking the three core exercises for bone strength, is a back squat, a deadlift, and an overhead press. And then they have jumping, high impact jumping. Okay. So they're kind of things that are a little bit out of our scope unless we are a personal trainer and we have that equipment to work with. And I do strength training and I do Pilates. And I can definitely say there is a difference between even holding a kettlebell or some heavy weights as to holding a bar. And I'm not sure, Katie, if you do strength training, but there is a big difference. And so the compressive forces that are going vertically down through the spine, back up through the ground when you're holding a weighted bar is significantly different to whether we're just holding our own body weight or we're holding some light weights in our hand. So when they talk about intensity and strength training, there are 3 areas that you need to consider and then decide where you want to fit in that, because we can work with that. We just need to know where we fit. So if we're talking high intensity, we're talking at what's referred to as 80% of someone's 1 rep max. So that basically means, Katie, that you're going to get tested as to how much weight you could do a squat with or you could do a deadlift with, okay, that you could only do 1 and your body just would not be able to do any more. So once they establish that, you'd then work at 80% of that and you would only be doing reps of about 5. So this is what we call hypertrophy training. It means you're going to push your muscles to their maximum to create the most load. Now, this is the latest research. A lot of this research has come out of Australia, in Brisbane actually, and it's from the Bone Clinic, and they have had excellent results with bone mineral density based on these higher level intensity activities. We must also remember these are highly, highly supervised. So we know, yes, they're safe. The research has been done, but they're highly supervised. So we also know the research up till recently has been that moderate level intensity is adequate enough to improve bone density. So this is really good to know too. Now, what is moderate intensity? Moderate intensity means that you can carry about 60% of your maximum and do 8 to 10 repetitions. So basically, I think this is achievable in a Pilates studio. But I think what we need to understand in a Pilates environment, that if we're wanting to work with bone health, we do need to introduce some of these progressive overload techniques and strategies. So for example, if you're giving somebody a scooter and, you're like, great, osteoporosis, and they're awesome exercises, by the way, standing abduction, scooter, all of those fantastic upright loaded hip exercises are wonderful. And if you're using your own body weight, you are directing that work specifically to the hip. So we need to know that site-specific area as well. Now, if I was to place say a person can tolerate holding a 5 kilogram kettlebell or 2.5 kilograms together in their hand, I'm then starting to create some specific work into the spine, because once I add weight to my hands, there's some feedback through the spine as well. So I can play around. So if somebody has osteoporosis both in the hip and the spine, I'm probably going to want to add some kind of weight that they can tolerate into their hands, once they've mastered. So again, I'm not just saying throw weight at people, because I think one of the advantages of Pilates is that we are also teaching people how to do these movements well. And so I think that if we can get those good biomechanics and get those hips moving well so that they can tolerate load better without putting them into an injury risk zone, then hopefully if they love Pilates and they don't like the gym and weight training, then we can start to hopefully progress them and incorporate some additional load for them. But if they have access and they do like the gym, we do need to be encouraging them to do both. Okay, because as I mentioned before, having that weighted bar and building up to be able to tolerate those loads is actually what's going to have a higher stimulation factor to actual bone mineral density. Okay, so that's when we think about bone mineral density, we need to think about incorporating more upright work in the studio and adding weight. Now, that doesn't mean that we take away footwork, we take away supine arms and things, but we think about how we're going to incorporate that. So what do we need to think about? We need to think about getting that good core control, getting good coordination, and then also working on balance. So one of the things I like to share and teach with this is when you're thinking about someone for bone health, think about how you can work some of these things into your Pilates repertoire. And I like to think of how can I take them away from their center and have them try to come back to it. So what do I mean by that? Because if we're thinking about reducing risk of falls, helping their balance, helping their coordination and how quickly they can respond to a change in direction, then I need to think about those things when I'm giving them, let's go supine arms. So instead of giving them the same arms one up and down circles, what if I did single arms? What if I did a single arm with opposite leg? You know, things that are going to take them and challenge those slings. So think about all of that work where you're actually challenging the sling systems, you know, using the straps, the ropes and things in terms of finding that coordination and how to kind of hold their center when they're being pulled away from it. Think about your quadruped exercises and how you can challenge those in your Pilates environment, because then we're giving them that wrist strength, that ability to trust, you know, their arms and their wrists if they do fall. So I think we do great things in Pilates. You just need to kind of think outside the square a little bit in terms of what's really going to help them in terms of identifying ways that can help their function and their relationship with gravity when they're outside the studio. So when we're thinking about balance, Katie, we're not just thinking about, at the end of the session, I'm going to have them stand on one leg. Yeah, that's great. We're going to do things like that as well. But I want you to think about ways that challenges where their center is, takes them off balance. You know, things that just pulling a different leg and arm, you know, things like that are going to challenge that system. And then the final point is bringing us back to the impact. So how can we create opportunity for impact? So when it comes to impact, we need to consider whether someone's had a previous fracture. If they've had a history of fractures, we need to reduce the amount of impact. So when we're thinking about impact, we're thinking about jumping, aren't we? We're thinking about stomping the feet. One of the key exercises that most doctors will send someone away with is, do 10 heel drops a few times a day. And that's basically just standing at the kitchen sink and just doing this consistent little drop the heels and bounce type action. So if you're thinking about things like that, in Buff Bones, we have some great fun ways that we incorporate impact work into a class setting. But if you're in the studio, for example, think about a warm-up. Think about marching on the spot. Think about adding a few stepping onto one leg, stepping side to side. I also like to use that as a way to warm all your fascial connections up, because one other thing I want to make note of, a really tight system does not respond well to impact through the body. So what I mean by that is if you're a real ab gripper, So if you're like someone that thinks like they've got to hold everything really tight, you're actually not going to get the most benefit from impact exercise, because we want this really nice, fluid, responsive system to be able to absorb impact and for it to actually reach the bone and know like, oh, wow, yeah, I have to work against this. I have to be stimulated. So if we're really grippy and tight, and I'm sure you've recognized this in your clients as well, you're not distributing load through the joints as well as you could be if your body is more fluid and more open to that. And I think a great example of that is, you try and raise an arm overhead for somebody who loves to grip their glutes, or they're a real ab gripper and they just get stuck. As to somebody who can kind of push the floor away, the system lengthens out and it's much easier for them to respond and press the arm overhead. So I think it's looking at things like that as well for people. And obviously, one other thing you have to be careful of in terms of impact and how much you give and whether you use a soft mat and things like that is, we know in postmenopausal women, we do also see a higher rate of prolapse and pelvic floor issues. So we need to be aware that, some of these women are not able to jump. So are there other ways we can provide some more gentle, soft type impact for them? And we can do that in the studio. We can add the soft mat. We can do different, just smaller range, just walking on the spot, even getting a little bit of up to, they suggest impact should feel like you're in a slow jog. So if you can get somebody to that sense of being in that position, sometimes I even would use a Bosu and have them marching, stepping up and down on a Bosu for that balance, but just to kind of get that stimulation through the whole system. And then, of course, you can add impact on the reformer. I am going to point out the jump board lying on your back is not the same as jumping on the ground when you're upright, but it can help the body learn how to absorb and bounce off the feet and use that energy from that Achilles tendon and just get that in their system. But don't think that jumping on the jump board is enough for bone stimulation. And again, think about your quadruped, jumping from the wrists is also really important. Things like even, we do wall push-ups where we have our hands on the wall. You could do a little jump and catch yourself on the wall. There's lots of different things that you can do. And obviously this is a lot of what we go through in the Buff Bones course. We put out a lot of ideas. We not only teach a class that's specific to bone health and the order that you teach it in, but we give you the reasons why and ways you can incorporate all of this just even in a normal, Pilates environment for somebody.
Oh, that's awesome. I feel like, a big part of our role as Pilates professionals is, because quite often we see people with poor bone density and they're not necessarily naturally gravitating towards movement anyway, so they come into the studio looking for help. We embrace them and teach them to start to actually enjoy moving, and then that can often lead to them, incorporating other more loaded exercises into their everyday life.
Absolutely, Katie. And that's where I think we are so important in this whole area of bone health, because what we also need, I'm going to just point out what we need to remember as well. This most recent research, which has sent this big surge of, like high intensity training, there really has only been about 6 really decent papers on this. So it's new. It's new in the world of research. And so we have to bear that in mind. And we also have to remember that there are many out there, as you say, Katie, who don't like exercise. And Pilates does seem to be a place that they find enjoyment. They just find some enjoyment in moving, or they like the environment. It's a very soft, nurturing environment, and it's a non-fear-based environment. So because we can work with them, we can work with what they like. That's the beauty of Pilates. We can adapt to so many different environments for people, to athletic, to elderly, to pregnancy. I mean, that is the beauty of Pilates, I think, and still allow a person the ability to understand their body better and move their body. And as you say, Katie, once they feel confident with movement, then they might feel confident to take on a little bit more and adapt to a little bit more load and feel safe doing that. Because, of course, if you think about it and you think you have osteoporosis and you have brittle bones, as they like to call it, and then you're told to do heavy strength training, I don't know, I kind of feel like, but what if I break under that? And, so I think there's an element of that we come into that place where we can let them know that you are strong, you're not going to break, and we can take you to that point where if you feel confident, you can step into that space. And if you don't, we are still here for you, and we know what we can do for you, and we can make a difference. And that also brings me actually to one of the things in terms of bone strengthening. Obviously, if somebody has lower bone density, you are going to get results quicker than somebody that has stronger bone density. So that's a really key element as well. Now, why is that important? Because some people say, I have only done Pilates and have increased my BMD, my bone mineral density. I have come out of osteoporosis and into osteopenic range, and I've only done Pilates. Okay? That's because that person has adapted. So whatever they've been doing in Pilates has added some additional challenge to bones that are already have not been responding, have been lower in density. And so they may have only required some weight, their own body weight, in terms of some scooter, some squats, some standing abduction, and they've seen a difference. So I think that we need to be looking at the individual as to whether, we can make a difference, because we can. If they can only tolerate their own body weight, and that is putting their bodies under stress, and I mean stress in a positive way, that's going to make muscle and bone changes, then yes, we are making a big difference. But I think what we need to remember is we can't keep that person in that space. We need to continually be changing that for them so that we can continually keep that remodeling process going. And remodeling of bone takes longer than muscle. It takes longer than soft tissue. So tendons and muscles may respond quicker than what bone does. Bone's general remodeling takes around 6 months. So our whole remodeling process is around a 6-month mark. So, when you're starting with someone as well, it's really good to let them know that we're going to stick with this for 6 months, and then let's get you retested and see what happens. And in the process, obviously, you need to keep checking what they can tolerate in load so that you're not kind of keeping them, because bone gets bored. Once you've stimulated it, Katie, and it's adapted to it, it says, yeah, enough now. I'm not going to do that anymore. You keep giving me the same thing. I've already adapted. I don't need to adapt anymore. It's different to muscle and tendon. So it needs constant change, constant challenges. And so it's really important that you don't keep them doing the same things over and over again. You want to really get that bone sensitivity rating up and levels up. And actually, what's interesting, they've done some studies on animals. Turkeys was one of them, which was funny. But they did some studies which took rest periods into consideration. And so this might be really useful in the studio as well. So basically, you can load up bone, you can load an exercise up. So just for example, you might be doing a set of scooter and then you actually take a rest. Now, that doesn't mean they can stand and do nothing in the Pilates studio, or you could put some hand weights in their hand and do maybe some postural lightweight shoulder exercises for 30 seconds or 20 seconds. And then you go back to the site-specific area that you're trying to work with. So in terms of a scooter, that's the hip. And so rest periods have shown in the research. So when they took the research and they had turkeys, they loaded up turkeys and they kept them going to max range over and over. And then they had another set and they gave them rests. The bone stimulation was higher in the animals that rested. So that's another really interesting thing you could play with, and we also know even in menopausal women that less can be more. They need rest periods. So they should not be doing heavy loaded exercise every day. Their muscles, their tendons, everything, bone needs that period to regenerate to then be able to be stimulated again. So, that kind of more, working harder, working more, it's not necessarily the answer when it comes to bone and muscles as we're getting into that midlife period of our life. It's more about working smarter.
Oh, that's fascinating. Goodness me, there's so much to learn, Lisa. How do we, if we're interested in continuing to learn, because this really, this is going to open a lot of people's awareness to how we can empower our communities and work with bone health. But how do I learn more if I wanted to continue?
Oh, you can learn from me. No, go onto the Buff Bones website. It's a wonderful resource. Follow Buff Bones through Facebook and Insta. Rebecca's always posting great interviews. There's webinars. It's amazing. She just provides such a wealth of knowledge in this bone community and this bone for people supporting that. And I'll be in Brisbane at the end of the year in November, and I'm so excited. It's my Katie, it's my most favorite course to teach. It's fun because one of the things, you guys, is make it fun. Make their experience fun. Like there's so many do's and don'ts out there, but there's so many things we can do and we can have a lot of fun with it. And I remember actually teaching a Buff Bones class at one of the Balanced Body tours years back, and Ken Endelman came in, who, as we know, is at Balanced Body. And we were doing this class at the end and everybody was just laughing so much because, we were doing some of the standing, stomping and calling out and using our voices, and Ken just loved it. And I just think it's the whole fun of, that it's not exercise for the elderly. It's actually, let's just get up and move and stimulate our bodies and have a bit of fun. And and that's what we really teach in Buff Bones. And so if anyone wants to know more, Katie, they can certainly get in touch with me. I'd love to hear from them. I also offer mentoring online. So if anybody does want to learn more in that bone and joint health space, that's what I love to talk about. And I love to help people, delve through problems and clients that they're having in the studio. So they're always welcome to get in touch with me. And yeah, definitely look up Buff Bones. And I would love to see as many people as I can in Brisbane.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. I've got one more question for you. Obviously you are a wealth of knowledge when it comes to Pilates, and it sounds like you've spent your career well-versed, continuing to learn and expand your understanding of the body. But is there what would you say to your younger self on reflection of what you have learned about your body, who you are today and who you are becoming?
Oh my gosh, Katie, we could sit here for another hour, really, couldn't we? I'm sure you could say that too. The first thing I'm going to say is Pilates was my savior. years ago, from coming from a slightly traumatic background, I realized like the power of really getting to know yourself and believing in yourself and believing that you're really good at something and loving what you do and really falling in love with something. So for me, Pilates really has been my life. And it's also been where I've made all my amazing friends around the world and this community that is just incredible. But if I could tell my younger self something, I would say, believe in yourself. Believe that what you're doing, whether you think you're a fraud or whatever and you should know more, that by showing up every day and helping somebody else, you are already being the best person you can be. And I also think that, not wanting to rush your journey and just let the journey take its own path, and don't be frightened to stand true to what you believe in who you are, and that you don't have to be everything to everybody. I think that was my biggest learning, Katie, that I don't necessarily have to have the answer to everything, because none of us do. We're always learning, and our clients are always guiding us through that, because the moment someone walks in the door and you go, oh, I don't know about that, you then go and find out about it. And it's okay to say, I don't know, but I'm going to go and find out. So, yeah, if I could tell my younger self I don't have to be perfect, then that would be the thing.
Mm-hmm. It's such a good message. When I work with my own students, and we spend 6 months with them, sometimes longer, mentoring them to become reformer instructors. And the pressure that we put on ourselves to know everything today, but just reflecting back, I always say to my students, well, you will reflect back on in 2 years' time, you will wonder what the heck you were teaching people. In another 5 years' time, you'll wonder the same. It is a journey of forever learning, and it's a lifelong journey, isn't it? So let's not be in such a hurry to know everything, because we're never going to anyway.
No, and don't think, Katie, then you go, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And so, and that's the beauty. So, I absolutely, you just said it, like, not pushing yourself, enjoying the journey, enjoy your clients, enjoy just being there. You're not out to prove anything. You've already proved it by standing there with that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so wonderful. Lisa, thank you so much for your time today. I know that people are going to love this episode. It is so, so important, and it just reminds us all of the wonderful role that we can play in people's lives, and the positive role that we can play in people's lives. That working with osteoporosis, it doesn't need to be scary. You're not going to break somebody if you just listen to your clients and be open to continuing to learn, because it's something that we have all decided to do as Pilates practitioners or professionals, is to empower people. So thank you so much for that message. It's really, really important.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Katie.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Lisa Jackson. I will pop in the show notes all about Lisa's workshop in Brisbane, but of course in the show notes you will definitely find resources for Buff Bones. And of course, if you want to reach out to Lisa, she is open arms for everybody in the community. Thank you so much, Lisa, for joining me. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I'm Katie Crane, the Pilates professional, and this is the Pilates Lounge podcast. Thank you.